Cool. All right. Well, yeah. Thanks for coming on the podcast. As I was saying in take one, uh, I found out about you through looking on the Cycling 74 forums. I found out about this uh, like MP3, not an MP3, but like a codec for compressing files. That was really it was able to compress files into an extremely small file size. Like it would take something else like a megabyte and make it like 4 kilobytes or some
Right.
crazy shit like that. So and it sounded interesting. Like I had a bunch of crazy artifacts to it and stuff, and I thought, man, it would be cool if there was a VST where you could just basically have a like a real time knob where you can, as you turn it up, it like compresses the file more and more. So it's basically like a degradation type thing. And then I found a Max patch that you wrote that was on the cycling forums from a long time ago that was designed to sort of recreate YouTube compression using some like I can't remember exactly how it was happening. To be honest, I didn't really understand how it worked. There was some like car to pole objects and pole to car objects and some FFT shit. And but I managed to turn it into a Max for Live device so I could use it in Ableton.
Oh, nice.
So that's how I found out about you. And then I looked at your cycling profile and I was like, oh, this dude's doing a bunch of crazy shit. And then found your website and started reading about your thesis and stuff. And I was like, oh, you'd probably be an interesting guy to talk to. So, for those who don't know you, how would you describe yourself? And like, if you introduce yourself, like, how would you describe yourself to people who don't know who you are or what you do?
Yeah. So I guess I like the real short bullet point would be something like I make weird music with audio analysis and machine learning. Is probably like the tiny version, and then like a slightly more medium version is I do a lot of performance and improv and a lot of DIY code and hardware stuff, and making my own instruments to I guess just kind of make funky music that I find interesting and challenging. And then have a bit of a background in, oddly enough, not in any kind of computer data science things. It was all sort of music, and for a long time, like classical music oriented things is my background. So like as an instrumentalist, I guess was a big part of my upbringing. And then getting into like guitar and pedals and DIY and circuit bending, kind of coming at electronics and coding from the hacky DIY side. And then now I'm still more in that domain than I am like a computer scientist, but like I've learned a bit more and can kind of do things a bit more air quotes properly these days. But it still comes from that place of play and breaking and exploration, as opposed to being like, oh, I shall do the thing, So that's, I guess, maybe like a little mini and a medium.
Yeah, I love that shit. I love tinkering. I love breaking stuff and like finding out how to do things in your own way rather than the necessarily proper way or correct way.
Yeah, for sure.
You said that you create music via music analysis and machine learning. What does that entail? Because I haven't seen any of that yet.
Yeah, so I guess a big part of that is that, I guess, tying it back to like kind of being an instrumentalist. So I do a lot of stuff with like drums and electronics these days, like acoustic drum set. And there's like a kind of a fundamental thing where if you're doing a lot of stuff with electronics while at an instrument, whatever instrument that may be, your hands tend to be otherwise occupied. So whereas you might have a controller or something, if you're doing just at your laptop or whatever, if I'm playing drums, I tend to be holding sticks or doing something else. So I don't really have the luxury to afford hands or attention or something to do other things. And I have feet and whatnot, but so a big part of what I started getting into, like maybe even like 10 years ago, was trying to get the most out of gestures that I was making. So like some of the crude stuff would be like onset detection, like event timing, like when things happen, like doing something based on that, or not necessarily always Mickey Mousing, because that can get a little bit boring, but like using that to inform processes. And then things like loudness, and then things like other kinds of, I guess the term would be descriptors. So like spectral centroid, which is kind of like a brightness, or there's other analytic things that you can do to extract information from the music. So doing that, generally speaking, in real time, to then either map that. But as I said, with like the Mickey Mousing thing, I'm not necessarily always a big fan of one-to-one relationships. So like if I hit the drum to necessarily have an immediate sound, like that's obviously very effective and powerful, but like that can sometimes be a little too flat, so like generally some other things as well. But the idea would be that like listening to what's going on and then doing something based on that.
When you say Mickey Mousing, do you mean just like a one-to-one relationship, like you hit the drum and something else? So like copying, basically.
Yeah, I mean, which is I do a lot of that. I have to say, like like where I play louder and it's louder, and I play quieter and it's quieter. Like that kind of thing is a quite effective way to map and have it become part of like a macro instrument. But if that's the only relationship, then that becomes a little bit like it's like watching like an old timey like film score or something, like where someone's running and then like you hear every single step of like on a xylophone or something like that. Like the music is just literally like copying what's happening as opposed to being like an informative layer that like communicates about emotion or some other aspect. Like it's literally just like
right.
Like
yeah,
a mind.
That makes sense. So what kind of relationships have you found between things that you're already doing and things that are analyzed and happen based on the things that you're doing that you've found to be kind of interesting?
Yeah, it's funky because there's like a fine line between like random tends to sound random, which tends to sound somewhat boring, and like equally distributed. Like white noise is like equally all the frequencies equally distributed, and it sounds like what it is, and it's just sort of like flat. Whereas having some kind of shape to it where you're informing things, but not necessarily choosing from random things. So to take like a concrete example, so I know with like your plugin thing, like you can have like whenever an event's detected, you're like removing kind of the transient thing and replacing it with something else. So taking things where when there's onsets happening, you're doing something. So that's cool and fine. But then instead of just doing things per onset, you can also have stuff where the amount of time between onsets is also information. So like if between like the first onset and the next one, it's like 200 milliseconds and another one's 100 milliseconds and the other one's 50. Now you start having like a temporal component and you can map that. And then is that relationship, is it speeding up or is it slowing down? How consistent is it? How varied it is? And all these kind of things. So just from like a string of like just hitting, like pressing a MIDI note or whatever, or doing onsets, you can extract a ton of information that's related to it, but not in directly the same way. So like per onset, you have a thing, but now I've been speeding up or I've been slowing down or I've been consistent or the times, however they're going, and then using those parameters to map to other processes like a synth or a sampler or whatever it is. So you're still informing, like I'm performing, and I'm using, the gestural language that I would while I'm playing, but now that is creating like these secondary bits of information from my playing to then map onto other stuff. So something like that is kind of like what I mean to have like the direct information, like loudness, brightness, whatever it is, and then also these other like ancillary bits of information.
Yeah, that's interesting for sure. Yeah, I read a bit of your PhD thesis, and it seemed like you were kind of talking about some integrated practice that interweaves composition, performance, improvisation, instrument creation, all these things. And it seemed like a central part of that research was developing some sort of a feedback loop where each facet of your work kind of informed the next part of your work to create this like holistic process. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that works?
Yeah, and I guess I was saying before, like, I have a kind of a background as like a instrumentalist, like kind of growing up doing that sort of thing, and then composition, and then doing coding, all these things. There was a lot of like parallel processes, or at the time I was thinking about them almost like different hats. Like you have like your composition hat, or then I'm a performer hat, or like a recording engineer hat, like these different roles that you take on. And that works really well. But then as I started drilling down further, like at a PhD level of like what I'm actually into and what I'm trying to work on and what I'm trying to improve at, that I found didn't really line up with what I was thinking, like philosophically, conceptually, like the fact that I'm a performer who's improvising with instruments I made. Why do I need to write something down on a piece of paper for me to read later? It was these steps that were make sense in a different context, but for my specific context, because I was doing a lot of these things, the metaphor of having different roles no longer worked or was beneficial to the process. So then like I was trying to kind of break that down of like, okay, I am performing and I am thinking about things in and outside of time. So by that I mean like while performing, I'm in time and then composition affords you thinking outside of time. So like even just with recording, production, or anything, like you can think of structures other than the now, now. When you're performing, like the only thing that exists is now. So thinking about those things was still useful, but like collapsing the sort of the silos of these roles. So that happened with, like, let's say, like the relationship between composition, performance, and improvisation. But then that also happened with, like, at the time I was doing a lot of stuff with using a snare drum and feedback. So I'd have like a small condenser mic that I would move around, and I would use this to control feedback and create different pitches and different friction on the drum. So it's basically a kind of unpredictable instrument of which you can do certain gestures, like imagine with an air microphone, you can kind of move it in and out by the speaker and you'll get feedback. And that's kind of a reproducible thing. The notes that you get will not be reproducible depending on like what the feedback gets, but you can still kind of reproduce gestures with different sonic results. It's kind of a little bit of a mini tangent there, but the idea of no longer having it be important to tie specific sounding results to specific movements, So either way, it was this idea of like no longer thinking what was how things were typically done and trying to investigate like what was important for me to think about. And then, this idea of, I guess, the feedback loop specifically with the software side of things, like making a bit of code or a patch or performance setup, and then going to perform with it or use it. And typically, like if you just use plugins or hardware, if it's not doing what you want, you have to then either modify what you're doing or buy another synth or whatever. Like you don't necessarily have direct control over the guts. You just sort of can affect what's happening. But if you're writing and making the instruments, you can. But you can adjust this in multiple places. So like I can, while performing, it's not doing what I want. So I can change what I'm physically doing right now. I could play differently. Or I can make a mental note, okay, the code didn't do what I want. Let me edit that code so next time it does do what I want. So it kind of makes this funky process where you can change things at multiple aspects of it. So it basically became this like kind of multi-dimensional spider web thing in each direction for each of these things. And I found that more deconstructed idea to be more fruitful in just how I thought about it. It was more closely aligned with how I thought about things. And it for me, it made for better and more interesting music and better way to think about it. Like now being, I think this year now, I think it's been 10 years since doing the PhD. I think about that slightly less in terms of like when you're in that kind of environment, you have to think about things very critically and frame things and contextualize things in a certain way that I no longer need to. So I don't necessarily think of it as not being roles anymore. Like it's just, I'm past that. I don't even think about that aspect of it anymore. I just sort of do stuff.
It's just like your process now, and it's just kind of ingrained.
Yeah, totally.
So what is it that you like? So it seemed like during the PhD you were kind of working on like essentially figuring out your process for how you would like to do all of these things, like design software, write music with the software that you design, modify gear, all this kind of stuff. What does your process look like now? Is it essentially the same, but you just don't think about the process as much, or has it changed since then?
It's more like, I guess, whimsical and exploratory, as in like, I got into like DJ turntablism kind of stuff. And I was like, okay, I want to kind of go down a bit over that rabbit hole and kind of learn and practice that and just kind of, that seems kind of cool. Or I've had this idea, which I still haven't manifested, but like I play a bit of video games, and like one of the types of video games I like playing is like a real-time strategy. So like StarCraft specifically, where APM, so actions per minute, is a very dense way. So like if you see a pro gamer, they're sat at a computer, they're doing this like mad stuff, which is almost opposite of like when you see someone perform with a laptop. It's famously like very slow. They're like checking their email. So I was like, okay, what if you take that level of like athleticism, but like apply it to, real-time performance. So I basically went down a rabbit hole of like trying to get good as a gamer for this specific thing, just to be able to conceptualize and apply some of that, which hasn't quite manifested yet, but like things like this where I'm like, a bit of it, and I can just kind of like chase these wormholes. And then I guess a lot of things which started towards the end of the PhD was like diffusing what I thought a creative practice was. So towards the end of I didn't really like the idea of like having pieces or performances or releases. Like I don't release music anymore for a variety of reasons. I still make a lot of music and I put out videos and I do stuff like that. But like the object of a piece or the object of a CD, I don't really vibe with anymore. But kind of smearing that even more of I really got into this idea of like openness and sharing, and I do stuff where like I do like mentoring sessions with people for free and all this kind of stuff to view that as all like part of a general creative practice, or videos that are like semi-pedagogical, like a bunch of video series I have like where it's improv and then people talking, things like this, to like have it where the creative practice isn't necessarily the one event and it's the piece of music and this is the thing, then this is the box and here's the art object that you should now go and consume as some kind of human aesthetic consuming machine, to really break that apart. So now it's just like doing creative things and helping people do creative things is all part of a broader creative practice. So that's a bit more kind of what I'm on about now or these days.
Yeah, I've always thought it'd be interesting if music worked kind of the same way that software does, where there's a version history and like a change log, and you could just have this kind of like you don't create a piece of music and then release that piece of music and then go like, here's the piece of music. You instead, start a project, for lack of a better term, and then just keep like adding to that project and changing it and stuff. And I actually, I don't know if you know Ben Jordan, the Flashbulb, but I had him on the podcast last week, and he was saying that he was trying to do that with his last release, but just couldn't because Spotify wouldn't allow it. Like the medium just is not there for it. And so if you look at that release on his Spotify, the cover is just like a bunch of like red texter scratching out a bunch of words because Spotify wouldn't allow him to have like V1 on the cover.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I mean it's funny because like there's some stuff that is like sort of semi-generative. Like there's some people that like this guy Tristan Parrish who does like 1-bit music and things like this, where it's like I think he sold, rather than selling a CD, it was like a jewel case with like a little microchip in it, and you like started the thing and then the thing played the music. So there's some things like this, like where but then it's like it's an art object, and it's not really like, obviously that's not going to work on streaming because that's not how things work. But so there are some people doing things like that. What's kind of weird is that some things are almost like that with like the hyper-capitalist thing. Like I was chatting with someone, I don't remember what song it was, but like there's some Beyonce song, I guess, where there was someone did a guest like featuring whoever, but then they removed that person. So now the track is like featuring someone else. So like I could totally picture a world in which, there's just some like random pop song and there's like a Pepsi mention in the middle, but then 6 months from now it's a Coke mention. Like I think we're gonna have something like that, but for the wrong reasons.
Right?
Like they just like swap out like Gucci mentions for whatever, some other kind of.
Yeah, I could totally see. Perhaps the reason Spotify doesn't allow stuff like version history is for this reason, because they are themselves like such a capitalistic company that they're like, oh man, that's exactly what's going to happen. Everyone's just going to use it for updating ads or replacing stuff. And what if you could envision a platform for music that has the ability to have version history and just assume that everybody is going to use it correctly, what would that platform look like to you? You think? What do you think would be the ideal thing? Do you think it would copy like the software world with GitHub type of things, or could you see something more efficient?
Yeah, I wonder. Like I've never really thought of like what something like that would look like, but I mean even something like that, because it would be interesting to view the multiple versions, to like be able to like hear, not necessarily like if there's multiple like version 1, 2, 3 of like this release now, but as in like this was the, like imagine if you could go and like get like a classic album that's been like just remastered to audio death, but you want to hear the original version that actually had headroom, that you could do that. So something like that would be kind of nice. But it's I guess it's a weird thing, because even as like a programmer, if you're not into like GitHub stuff, conceptually it's a weird thing, like multiple versions and they're in parallel and forks and stuff like that. Like it's not like an everyday thing. Yeah. like, I mean, I guess with books we have like the choose your own adventure stuff, and there's been some like kind of film equivalent things like in Netflix or whatever, where you kind of like pick and kind of you jump around and stuff. But yeah, I have no idea. That's interesting.
I think honestly, I think if like you could just have it on Spotify, I think, and then every track would just default to like the latest version of the track. But then maybe there's a little drop down menu next to every track where you like click on the drop down menu and it has like a bunch of versions. And if you want, you can go through and like listen to old versions or something. I think that would be great. But I understand, yeah, probably why they don't want to do that for reasons like you mentioned. And I'm sure there's probably some other reasons that I'm not thinking of.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like also space would get weird, like, because if it's like, you know, if that just becomes the norm and then like all of your server space multiplies by 10 or whatever, because there's multiple versions of everything. Yeah,
it's also possible. You mentioned that you don't release music anymore and you don't vibe on releases really. Why is that?
Man, so it's a weird, like, so I still like I still buy music, and I actually found that to be a really good way to transition from, like, you know, when you're young and you torrent all the music and all that, and then, you know, eventually you kind of grow up a bit, and it was too, I could take in, so that like me as a listener being able to listen to everything. So for example, I don't have and use Spotify for many reasons, but like it was just too much music. So like I buy releases, and then that kind of slows the rate at which I intake music. But for myself personally, I got like, for a long time I was doing stuff where I was making like art objects. So like it was like a CD, but it was like handmade stuff, or I did a release where like I hand printed a book or things like this. So like to make the thing itself meaningful, and not just have it be like a CDR that you kind of buy, or like a whatever, a digipack. So I started doing that, but then after a while it felt a bit weird, and obviously it doesn't really scale, but that wasn't really a concern for me. What started doing it was that I was trying to really decommodify like how I did things, like writ large. Like I didn't want to sell things specifically. And at the time I was also doing a lot of videos with my partner, and I was like, video, for better or for worse, is intrinsically valueless. Like you don't go onto YouTube and expect to have to pay. Like the videos are free; they're just there. So like that was like already valueless, which is problematic for other reasons. So I was like, okay, rather than like, even if I made a CD or a release and I gave it away for free, it was still an object of commerce, and is still an object of consumerism that I was putting an asterisk next to and saying like, you know, like here's like, it's a thing that's normally for sale, but you can have it for free. Like I was like, I can just bypass that, not have an object of commerce at all, and instead make videos which are valueless, you know. So that I think was part of it. And then yeah, so it was many things, but like I guess a big one was like the decommodification. Silly, like stupid thing.
Nice.
Yeah, so something like that was, I think, at the core of it, like decommodifying, and then also my relationship to like authorship, which I was kind of getting at a little bit before with like the PhD thing, like creativity not necessarily being this unidirectional thing where you make stuff and other people take it in. Like it's just you are an agent in this like more broad human creative thing that just exists in the world. So authorship seems funny in that context. But
do you really think videos are valueless? Like I know the standard is that you go to YouTube and you expect to see a bunch of videos that you can watch for free. Maybe they have ads, and maybe you pay for YouTube Red or whatever to not get ads. But do you not think that if like you put a ton of effort into the video, like it's got some worth to it?
Like I don't think videos are valueless, and obviously like movies and films, like, you know, like there's some really amazing artwork that happens in that as a medium. I meant it more in that, like, I don't know, there's something about like growing up. I didn't grow up with YouTube, but like as in living in a time where people expect to go onto YouTube and have videos just play. It meant that I can slide art that I made into this, how it's generally treated as valueless. Like I wouldn't necessarily say that I don't think videos themselves are without value, both monetarily or aesthetically. But the way that functions as a medium is is treated without value, I guess is maybe a better way to put that.
Is it maybe like, do you look at it maybe as it stresses you out more if you apply a lot of value to it during the creative process, and so that's why you don't release? Or is it?
No, I mean, I have no issue with like I have none of the like record anxiety. Like I make a lot of music, and I put a lot of music out into the world. It was more this is a thing, and I want you to have this thing, like that. That act was less relevant for me to do in what has historically been like album sales. Like I didn't want to make an album that I was then selling as a thing. And because a lot of what I do is improv oriented anyway, so that's very like performance, real time, kind of fragile, fleeting sort of thing anyways. It'd be different if I made a different kind of music, I suppose.
Yeah, I do like the idea of like Buddhist sand paintings, for example. They like spend a long time like making this sand painting, and then the wind just blows it away, kind of.
Yeah.
It's definitely a good practice in detachment.
Yeah, I mean, there's an aspect of that. Like, I'm not so precious, because some people are like, "Oh, you don't record improv," and like that's a position. I don't necessarily feel that way. I do record improv, and I have a lot of videos of improv and stuff. But there's something about the fragility of the moment and ephemerality that I think is quite beautiful. You know, like much like that stuff, like where you have like these things, and yeah, they are momentary.
You mentioned at the start of the conversation that you've been working on machine learning stuff. What have you been doing in that space?
So that one is, I've been doing a lot of the stuff of adjacent to the audio analysis things. So I haven't done any of the stuff like with like generative AI. So nothing with like I don't even know what the audio versions of that stuff, like where like it spits out things at you. Most of it has been basically like neural networks, classification, things that are cheap in the context of machine learning, as in like they can run real fast. And also, I guess to give some examples. So some of it, I'm sure you may have seen some like that sensory percussion type stuff, like where you can hit a drum in different spots and have different things happen. So things like that, like where you give it examples of a thing and have it recall that thing. So that kind of stuff I find quite powerful. And then even things like where something I've been working on quite recently is the way GPS satellites work is that you have, there's a bunch of them all over the place, and they're all projecting their time at you. And as long as you can pick up the time from 3 of them, the difference between the time that it arrives to you and some math means that that's how GPS works. So it can tell where you are from just the distance of you to multiple things. So having a drum and then having multiple sensors on that drum, so like basically little microphones, depending on where you hit the drum, audio will travel to the sensor at a different, it'll take a different amount of time. So doing that, and then a bit of math and some neural network stuff, being able to tell exactly where you hit the drum. So not necessarily like whether the center or the edge or anything like that. Like literally, I hit the top left corner 1 centimeter from the edge, and be able to like determine that. Stuff like that I find really interesting, because it affords a kind of expressiveness that isn't possible generally speaking. And then one of the other aspects of that I think is, as I said, I do a lot of stuff with performance, and latency is a massive, specifically with drums. Like you can get away with a bit of latency with voice to a certain extent, or with keys or synths, just because on a keyboard, like where you press the key is kind of a mushy place, and like the things aren't so precise. Whereas with the drum, if I hit the drum, you hear that sound like immediately. And if you hear a sample like 20 milliseconds later, you hear a flam. So I think like drums specifically are really sensitive to latency, which is a pain in the ass because I play drums. So I've always been fascinated with the idea of like trying to extract a lot out of a little. So basically almost everything I do, I extract a bunch of audio descriptors from 256 samples, which is roughly 5 milliseconds, which is like a comically short amount of time, near it's not inaudible, but it's not really enough to get meaningful information out of. But if you're clever and do stuff, you can juice things out. But I want more. So I've done a bunch of stuff where I can train a neural network where like I give, play my drum or give it examples of whatever, and then create a neural network where if it hears the 5 millisecond bit of audio, predict what it would have sounded at 100 milliseconds. So not necessarily recreating the audio, but predict how loud it would be, or how bright it would be, or how noisy it would be. So to use a neural network to basically time travel, essentially. So that's been some like a kind of a more recent research project of that works, and it works fairly well, and trying to do that with better accuracy and more meaningful versions of data. So like the project that, like when you emailed me, I was in London with working on a project with a buddy at like Queen Mary University, where they make the Bella boards or the Trill, like those Gliss things that are some, like you may or may not see that stuff, but they do a bunch of cool research there. And we were there working on a project where doing timbral remapping. So taking the available timbre space of whatever input, in our case, we were working on drums, and then taking that, and like with my drum, I can make this variety of sounds, picking a synth preset and then wanting to have the same variety around it, which is less straightforward than one would think. So yeah, then taking that and doing some of this like kind of funky time travel stuff. So yeah, that sort of stuff with machine learning. So very little, literally nothing with like generative, like the typical stuff of what one normally does with like AI as a thing.
Wait, I'd like to hear more about this timbral remapping. So you're saying you would play your drums, so you would have like a corpus, I guess, of types of sounds that the drum can recreate, and then you're trying to map that onto a synth to make it sound like the drums, or is this?
Kind of. So like one way to do that would be like to have, I want to hit like something like what Simplant would do, like where you give it a sound and the synth recreates that sound. So that's kind of that, but like specifically not that, in the sense of what we're trying to do is like, let's say I have like my sound and I have like a bunch of examples. Then I pick an arbitrary synth preset that could be like super different from the way the drum sounds. But what I want to do is to take and create the variety that's available in this drum sound, but around that synth sound. So like to take like whatever, a snare hit, and then take like an 808 hand clap or some, I mean, I guess that sounds kind of close to a snare, but something that doesn't sound like the snare, and then have like the sort of the brightness goes around and moves in like, or the loudness, like whatever the range that you have that's available of your drum, being able to do that for whatever the arbitrary sound is, even if they're really not like each other at all. So like it's easier to do it like where you're just having one copy of the other, because then you just have one sound like the other, which is also cool. But in this case, it's to take the timbral variety and basically you take that and map it. So like the timbral difference, I guess, is what it would be. So from this hit to that hit, it's 4 dB louder, and the centroid would like, which is like your brightness is, 2000 hertz or whatever. I want to have the synth also do that difference, but from wherever it's at, even if it's a brighter or darker synth, whatever it is. So we're doing that at the moment with like, it has to be a little time consuming, where the analysis of the drum part, that's easy enough. Analysis of a single synth hit is easy enough. But once you start into like permutations, or like if a synth has like 10 parameters, and you want to find all the possible sounds of it, like it would take 100 million years to do like move every parameter, like, 0.1, 0.1, 0.1, and do this for every single knob. Like it would literally take forever. So what we do is like you seed a bunch of random presets, you use a genetic algorithm, which is similar to what like something like Simplant does. And then it uses that to morph like over X amount of generations. So it takes about like 20 minutes to get like a reasonable set of presets. But then that's married to that one preset. So we kind of have to do this many times. So in the end, it ends up sounding quite cool and expressive, but it takes a little bit to set it up. So we're working on ways to make that less, not to have to run a genetic algorithm or to do something else to be able to predict what the difference in timbre will be.
Right. I'm curious what you're using for classification. Are you using something like Light GBM or Shark ML or something, or Essentia, or are you just like building your own neural network basically from scratch?
It's more or less from scratch. So I'm using in Max, there's a project called Flucoma, so Fluid Corpus Manipulation. So it's like a Max package library that I was not involved in as a coder. I was involved in it as like a programmer, but it was at Huddersfield where I did my PhD. So it's like a 5-year European funded program that basically made a bunch of machine learning tools for Max and Pure Data and Super Collider and other things. So I use at the algorithm level a bunch of Flucoma stuff. And in there, they have different types of neural networks. The most common one I use is an MLP, which is a multi-layer perceptron, which is just like, it's kind of like the simplest, dumbest neural network where like you have some points and then you have a certain amount of nodes and it literally just like flows to each other. There's fancier type of neural networks that like do feedback and things like that. So this isn't doing that. It's kind of like more, they're not old school. Like none of these things are that old, but it's fairly dumb. So, and in terms of the types of descriptors, so like essentially there's all sorts of ones available there. It's a small subset of ones that I myself and other people have done a bunch of testing with to find what is most perceptually relevant, but that's not always the case. Like, because descriptors are weird. Like you can, like numbers can mean anything. Like statistics can mean anything. Like you can make numbers say anything. Like it's like a hard thing to like quantify. So like, how do you describe a sound numerically? Like that's, you know, some things like loudness, we have ways to measure that fairly accurately in terms of like how we hear in different, you know, the frequency bands and all that kind of stuff. But when it gets to like timbre, it gets a little bit more abstract. And how do you represent timbre? How do you represent like change over time, like morphology? Like all of these things are really abstract into like there's no right answer to those things. So you have to make decisions about what you think is valuable. Do you care about pitch or not? So for example, with drums, pitch isn't massively relevant, but it's somewhat relevant. So kind of picking what descriptors. So for example, when I generally do classification, I use MFCCs, which are Mel Septrum Frequency Coefficient. I never remember the full acronym. MFCC, Mel Frequency Septrum Coefficient, I think is what it is. It's a way to summarize timbre with lower dimensionality. It's often used like, I guess it was originally used in like speech analysis and speech synthesis, but it ends up being a somewhat efficient way to encode complex spectra. So it's useful as kind of like a summary of like this kind of timbre sounds roughly like this. The numbers look weird. Like you look at them and it's like, as a human being, I don't know what they mean. But to the computer, they're like, okay, that set of numbers means it's a rim shot or whatever. And these set of numbers mean it's like a hi-hat or whatever. Like it can differentiate that pretty well.
So does this thing basically for timbre just spit out a huge array of numbers, and then each of those numbers is kind of like a feature of the sound? Like one of it might be, I know in like AI, sometimes you'll spit out these huge like arrays of numbers, and one of the numbers might be like the mood of the text. The next one might be kind of like the subtext of the text. The next one might be like, is it a question or is it not?
Like when you get into like really complex neural networks, it gets even more abstract like this. But in this case, like to take a simpler example, like so something like loudness. So I want to analyze loudness for like a specific window of time. Generally speaking, with FFT settings, you don't just analyze the whole chunk. You analyze like a bunch of hops and you analyze a bunch of rolling windows. So that gives you now for like, let's say for a given, I want to analyze this much audio. Now I have like 7 readings of loudness. Okay, so like I can maybe average them. That's probably a sensible thing. So you have the average. But then you have like, okay, what's the minimum and maximum? That's some more. What was the standard deviation? How much did it vary? So it kind of builds up really quick. So like what I typically do for my classification specifically is I'll do 13 MFCC coefficients, which is a kind of a standard number for that. And then I take their mean, so like the average, the minimum, the maximum, and the standard deviation, so how much it varies. And I do this for the raw value and then one derivative, meaning the value minus the previous value. So it ends up making 104 dimensions. So an array of 104 values that like are illegible. Like you can look at them and like play and look and like they mean nothing to me as a human. However, the computer is like, oh yeah, I got you. And it can make sense of that. And in general, like neural networks, when you're doing that stuff, part of what they do is they kind of figure out which dimensions are kind of useless. So it might be like the subtext of a subtext of a subtext in this case is useless. So like the derivative of the standard deviation is like, it doesn't matter fuck all. So the neural network just sort of zeroes that out and kind of builds around it. It ends up being a kind of an odd space to work creatively because you there are certain things that like as human beings we're good at making decisions about. And there's things that as human beings we're like famously really bad at. Like if you had to generate like 100 random numbers, the distribution would be really shitty. Like we're really bad at doing certain kinds of things with our brains, but we're good at other things. And obviously the computer has its own version of that. So it's kind of an interesting place to work where like you make some decisions about what you think are important, then you kind of run some code and it's like, oh, that's not necessarily the case. But then, yeah, it kind of sort of dancing back and forth with intuition, computation, and aesthetics in kind of a weird way.
Yeah, it's kind of insane once you get into this stuff. You realize just how fast computers actually are. Like I remember when I learned what convolution reverb was, which I actually learned about on this podcast whilst talking to the Kilohertz developers, or one of the Kilohertz developers. He was explaining convolution reverb to me, and he's basically like, yeah, you just take this sample and you play it back 44,100 times per second at every volume that sample is at. And I was like, that seems like a lot of tasks for the computer to do, but it seems to handle it just fine. I can have like 50 convolution reverbs open in Ableton, and it's no problem. Yeah, it's insane that like how fast you can just spit numbers at a computer and it can pass them. Really wild. You mentioned that Flacoma was a funded program. I didn't know that this is how does that work? Like how does a person or a group of people get funding to build a program for Macs? Is that paid for by Cycling 74? Or is it paid for?
No. So like that was developed in like an academic context. So like at the university, they pitched the thing. So this was in England, and it was when England was part of Europe. So it was like pre-Brexit. And they wanted to do this big expansive project, which means we need a certain amount of developers, we need a certain amount of people working on it. And then P.A. Tremblay, which was the lead of the project, submitted a funding application to the European Research Council, like a European body that like funds stuff. And he made a pitch, and like it's like with most interviews, probably like lots of pitches, lots of meetings, and then it got funded. So it got I don't remember how much, like multi-million for X amount of years to pay for a lot of people, a lot of staff, a lot of projects, concerts, and the development to make this package, which was, so there's a Max version, a pure data version, SuperCollider version, command line, so just for terminal stuff. And then it's all open source as well. So that's part of the kind of funding agreement. So there's a lot of things like this where academic oriented things, there are funding bodies for them that people apply for, and then essentially just to pay for like researchers' time to do things.
It's wild that the government would pay for something like that. Like imagine trying to convince the government, I want to make this tool to do this like extremely niche, extremely specific thing. Like I can't even imagine how you begin to like convince somebody who doesn't know anything about that to pay you millions of dollars to do that.
Yeah. I mean, with a lot of things like in academia, like research is I guess essential, less so these days because it's like everything's a factory and all that, but like at the core of it philosophically is the idea of like making new knowledge and research. And so like for some people, like if you're a research professor, like part of your job is to do research, so you're getting paid to kind of do this. If you have a bigger idea that needs to scale up, then that needs more people. But in mainland Europe, that's more a thing. In the UK, it's slightly less a thing. In the US, much less a thing. It's a lot more like, it would be more industry oriented. Like if you want to do something like that, you'd pitch it to like some venture capitalist thing. We want to make this thing. We want to make this plugin. We want to sell. And it would be a similar kind of thing, but there would be like a very like, we want our money. Like it's a whole different context. But it would be ideally, I would imagine, the generation of new information at the core of it.
Yeah, it makes sense for sure. When you were describing earlier what you do for classification, I was reminded of concatenative synthesis.
Yeah.
How different is that, do you think, from what you're doing? Because it seems like kind of the idea behind that is you take a bunch of sounds and you give it a thing that you want it to match, like a target, and then it kind of like I think it takes those sounds directly, right, and cuts them up into little chunks and rebuilds that target. It sounds like in a way that's kind of what your thing does, but more based on parameters, not based directly on like those mechanical samples themselves.
Yeah, like it's all related in that, like, so I was like Ben Cantle's a buddy. It was like I think we both share him as a buddy that like he does a bunch of stuff with that, and like we've had plenty of chats because doing software in that kind of world. One of the stuff that I think his concatenator or whatever his like his newer plugin does,
Yeah.
it's doing the matching per grain. So like at the core of both of them will be some kind of descriptors. You're analyzing your real-time sound, you're analyzing your target, and you have a corpus of the descriptors of both, then you're finding the nearest matches. So that kind of happens always. I think one of the things, I don't know exactly because it's a plugin, so it's just I don't know what the code looks like. But I think one of the things that they're doing is they're, rather than browsing the whole of all the available points, which could be like in the hundreds of thousands, they're doing some clustering, which is kind of like classification, where rather than you deciding and me being like, okay, this is one class or this is another class, you tell the computer to like find clusters, and it will find the things that are naturally near each other and group them together. So I think he's doing some clever thing where you give it your target sound, it finds the cluster that's closest to it, and then within that picks some options. So you almost get like a round robin type thing within that cluster. So it kind of does like a multi-stage thing, as far as I understand it. As I said, I've not really looked at the code, just looking at like the videos and like how he's explaining stuff. So there, I think they're doing actual clustering, which would be classification. Which is is that thing. So like finding the nearest version like it, and then within that, then finding the nearest match that is the closest match. But it's wild in that like even going back to like the computers being faster stuff, like this is essentially like data lookup. Like I've got this set of values, like which set of values are nearest, and like find that. Like that's almost like a spreadsheet type thing,
Right.
but really, really, really fast. And yeah, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of versions of it. That kind of stuff doesn't necessarily happen like at sample rate. It tends to be like every 30, 40 milliseconds or something like that. But yeah, it's still plenty fast. Computers, all right with it, which
is that analysis process somewhat similar to what you're talking about with the stuff you're working at? It like creates these clusters and then it looks at those clusters.
Yeah. Like I think I don't know what descriptors they're using for, and I think you can select whether you care about pitch or not. Like so, you make some decisions about that. But I don't know if they're using MFCCs or Melbands or what specific descriptors doing that. But I imagine that very much the same. Like they're analyzing a set of descriptors, whatever they happen to be, probably in some kind of rolling time frame. And then using those to compare stuff. I imagine because it sounds really good, like it's more accurate than a lot of that concatenative synthesis. It's a terrible word to say. I would just say concat because I always fuck up the saying the rest of the word. A lot of that stuff tends to sound mushy and granular. Like it almost just sounds like floaty granular synthesis. And I think he's gotten a good sound where it sounds, you can have like transients and things that actually sound crisp, which is hard to get with a granular synth.
Right.
So I suspect they're doing something with onset detection as well.
Right. And you've made a concatenative synthesizer yourself, right? You made CC Combine.
Yeah. So I've had a few versions of that. And part of that was that like at the time, so that was maybe like, I want to say 15 years ago now. It's been a while that the versions to do something like that were using a catart. So like something from IRCAM, which was powerful. Well, Jesus, something. The mind. I don't even know where to turn that off.
Do I get it? Let's see. I don't think I get it.
It does it on this computer, but like not on my like laptop. I think it also does like, there we go. And I think will it do a little heart? Yeah, look at that. I don't know if it's like the phone, because my phone is my camera, so I don't know if it's the phone doing it or if it's the so like the options to do concat synthesis were minimal and all had a big pain in the ass overhead. Like it was like you very encumbered. You had to do a whole package in a library, and like to even understand how the code was working was like next to impossible because it was like layers of stuff. So I wanted to try to make a version of that for one I understood, and also for me, importantly at the time, was easy to use. So I made that patch as a way of doing that. And I, for the time, it sounds okay. It sounds a bit more chaotic, and like rather than being like a smooth resynthesis, it was more like an accompaniment, like a funky accompaniment. And then some years later, made like a Max for Live device that was like sounded a lot better, a lot smoother, a lot more like what I do now. But it's not secret sauce, but there's like doing something as you think it should be done. only goes so far, and then you always have to do like some kind of weird optimizations and little things to make it like to put it over, like, you know, getting 80% there is easy, and then it's like that last 10 or 20% that's like a pain in the ass. So it was something like that, like getting the 80% was like okay, and then getting those last bits is just like, oh, what if I do this slightly different, or what if I try this, but oh, what if I only do this when I do that, and then you start getting like the results that, you know, that you're kind of after.
Yeah, I know other than software, you've also built a bunch of hardware like instruments and stuff. You built the Specto Situationalist, the Sadrassi Tom, the Electric Whisk.
Yeah.
What are you still building instruments like this?
Yeah, these days it's become more about, I got like a 3D printer like 7 years ago or something like that. So a lot of what I do these days tends to be more like augmentations to existing instruments. So like having a 3D printer and making that to make additions or extensions or things I can attach to often the drum, but like other things like that, to kind of, yeah, extend on an instrument rather than like building new instruments from scratch, which I still do enjoy doing, but more of it these days has been like just messing around in CAD, doing like 3D design, printing things. And yeah, like of the many things that of drums are a pain in the ass for, they're round, and it's kind of hard to attach things to round things without drilling holes and stuff. So it's been a fun learning curve. And with a lot of these things, even if I didn't use these things to make music, I think I like the kind of hobby of it. I like tinkering and just mucking about. So I would probably do this stuff anyways, but it's kind of nice that I can like learn a bit of like 3D design and then figure out if they're all attached to my drum. Otherwise I'd grab one. But like, yeah, just working that stuff out. So it's more things like that these days, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I think tinkering is a lot of fun. I've been building some synths lately and some EQs in my garage. It's been nice to get away from the computer for a bit and do some stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, hey man, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. It's really interesting hearing what you're up to. Where can people find you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, I guess the main place would be my webpage, just rodrigoconstanzo.com. And then I guess the next thing is like on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel, I guess, /KRIISTA. So Krista is just the name of the YouTube channel. I don't really, I mean, I have a Mastodon, but I don't really have any other socials beyond that. And then I don't think anybody else has Mastodon.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, hell yeah, man. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks a lot for having me, man.